So if I make mistakes today, it's purely because of nervousness.
You're very sweet, but I'm sure you won't. And thank you for saying that. I must say, it's amazing to be rewarded before one has worked for it. You've already given us the prize, and now we have to work and justify it. So let's have a crack at the conversation.
Yes. So, Dr. Tharoor, I want to start by first. I think the first impression that possibly all of us have had of you is, I'm not sure how you'll feel about that, not as a politician or a diplomat, but as a wordsmith. That's what I remember you as from my days in school and college. And that's where I want to start, that you've written more than 25 books by now, and we're celebrating your latest book, A Wonderland of Words. You've written about colonialism, you've written about Hinduism, you've written about our current Prime Minister, you've written about Nehru, you've written about so many diverse topics and personalities, but now you're finally writing about words, which you're known so much for. Famous or infamous, I leave that to the audience with the memes that come up. But I want to understand, where did this reputation for you really start from? How did Shashi Tharoor become Tharoorasaurus, if I may put it that way?
You know, I don't think I deserve it, but anyway, it happened. And I think I can trace it back to a particular episode when, if I remember rightly, so outraged that I issued a tweet describing this particular show as a farrago of distortions, misrepresentations, and outright lies, masquerade broadcast by unprincipled. This was my outrage at work, but I didn't really think I was using any words that people didn't know. Then, to my from the concise Oxford Dictionary, wondering why suddenly 1 million people had been looking up the word farrago, which apparently had never had more than 5 or 6 people every day asking what it meant. And most of the books about me, people calling me Mr. Farrago, people opening up Twitter accounts with the name of Mr. Farrago and so on. And the amusing thing is, it's a word I had used frequently in my debates at St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. And at that time, everyone seemed to know what it meant. But somehow, it looks like our vocabulary has slipped a little bit. Books about it, I had 2 choices. Either, retreat into sullen resentment about this, or embrace it and play along with the joke. And I chose the latter course. So I remember when that book that you mentioned about our current Prime Minister was written, and my publisher asked me to issue an announcement about it. I said, this announcing my next book is coming out will not get very much attention. So instead I wrote saying that I want to assure readers that this book is not just a 400-page exercise in floxy nosi nihil impurification. And then I gave the meaning of the word, which meant the act of estimating something or someone as worthless. I'm just going to say this, I'm not going to just say, oh, the Prime Minister is worthless. That's a political book. It's more complicated than that, so read it. That was the purpose of the tweet. But it served its purpose and worse. It served its purpose and it got a lot of attention, retweets and attention for the book. But what was worse was for the next year, I was having parents wheeling out their 3-year-old, 4-year-old toddlers to come and tell Uncle Floxy Nossi. The poor child would have to recite the whole word to show that they had learned it. That was very embarrassing. But I mean, it all became fun and games. And then, of course, I played along with it. There were, when a particular Indian politician who had been elected along with us, then switched to the other side, I just tweeted one word, snollygoster. Definition, a shrewd, unprincipled politician. First use, 1848 United States. Latest use, India today. And I didn't actually mention the name, the state, the incident. Everyone knew what I was talking about. And I'm amused to discover that since then the word snollygoster has been used by very many other writers and journalists in talking about politics. So, in a sense, it's a contribution to the national conversation. I won't say much more than that, but it was fun doing it. And some of the jokes at my expense, I don't mind either. I mean, I don't know how Rajnath Sahab feels. I went to see him once when he was Home Minister about something, and they issued a cartoon with a box over his head saying, "Bhai main kya karu, mujhe dictionary bhi nahi mere paas," something like that. Which is very unfair to him, I think, because he and I get along very well and speak very clearly to each other. But then there was another one which I thought was not bad, which is just a text meme that said, I used to think I was poor.
Education.
Well said.
And on my way here, I was practicing it again and again, but so I had to say it. Even though you mentioned it, I had to say it.
That's right. As long as your parents didn't drag you to me to say
My
it.
mother's right there. I was just proud.
So she's passed the test.
Yes.
Very well.
Going back to my convent school teacher now. So, Dr. Thiru, you also mentioned in this question that you always thought that what's so normal about this? Why do normal people not talk like this? Is that what you think while talking to us commies, us normal English speakers?
Look, when some Hindi Vidwan uses big, highfalutin Sahitya terms, no one seems to upbraid them for it, dripping with Sanskrit and so on. But in English, if you use a complicated word, it's suddenly seen as something affected. Look, it so happened that I grew up with the English language. You know, my parents are Malayalis, born in villages in Kerala, educated Malayalam medium. They moved. My father moved to England when he married my mother to Canada. I was born there. I grew up in Bombay, went to high school in Calcutta, college in Delhi. So the language followed me. I mean, I often explain to people, you don't choose the circumstances of your life and your upbringing. Give that. So wherever I went, it was English. That was the language of my classroom, the language of my friends, and therefore, me, it was a very natural language. I read widely in English. And by the way, that's another factor I have to say for my outsized vocabulary, as people seem to think it is. It is that I was an asthmatic child in India, because we moved to India when I was 2.5, and I was in India. First of all, there were no, anywhere in the world, there were no ventilators and nebulizers and bronchodilators and so on. All there was were these tablets that would make your heart go thud, thud, thud and force open your lungs to breathe. So you are a small child, you can't sleep, you're sitting up in bed because you can't even lie down since you choke if you try to lie down. So I'm sitting there, what do I do? There's no TV in India in those days. And certainly there's no Nintendo or PlayStation, no mobile phones, computers weren't a gleam in inventor's eye yet. So what do? I read. I read everything I could lay my hands on from a very young age. I was the eldest child in my family, so I didn't have elder brothers and sisters whose books I could borrow. So I started reading my parents' books before I was even old enough to understand them. But in the process, I naturally acquired a hefty vocabulary, because when you come across the same word in 3 different books, 3 different contexts, you understand the usage, you understand the nuance, and you don't really even need to look at a dictionary, because from the sentence and the storyline or whatever, you can figure out what you're reading. And so it is through reading that I acquired. So whenever people say, "Sir, teach us a word," or we come and tell us how to improve our vocabulary, I tell you, I'll teach you not a new word, but an old word, a very simple word, a very short word: read. Because if you read, automatically it will not only expand your horizons and everything else, it will also enlarge your vocabulary, if that's important to you. And to me, that's really, really all it is. Read, and I think the words will come. And if the words come, that means that you can express yourself with greater clarity and greater precision. For me, the purpose of language is to communicate. But you must have something worth communicating. You must have ideas, you must have thoughts. And if you have something you want to say, then you must have the words, the vocabulary, the tools to convey those thoughts to the person or the people you're trying to talk to. And that's where, because I have the words, I feel that I can usually be fairly confident that I have used precisely the word I intend to use to convey the thought or the idea or the emotion that I wish to convey.
Right. So just to understand how far behind we are in the reading pace that you followed in your childhood, how many books would you read, let's say, in a month in your...
As a child, I read like crazy, and in fact, there was one year, I think I was 12, when I was nuts enough, 12 or 13, to set myself a target. I said, I'm going to read 365 books this year. And I did, and I managed to finish
65 books.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a stupid thing to do. No, I'm not advising anyone to follow that example. Never read to a target. I want to particularly say to the younger people here, read for pleasure. Because I meet young parents all the time who come to me and say, oh, our kids are not interested in reading. Or somebody else says, my kid only reads school books for the homework, and then they go off and play, or they watch TV, or they're on the computer. And my answer to them is, that's a great loss for them. And I'll tell you what, first of all, as far as reading is concerned, if you realize that reading is not only about school and class, it's a big win for you. One mother told me, oh, my son is only interested in football. I said, get him a book on football. There are books on football. If he's only interested in football, he might see a book with lots of photos of football, but he'll also read the text accompanying it, the descriptions, and he'll find out more. He will learn things that he won't learn from just watching football on television. He'll learn words, he'll learn vocabulary, he'll learn some football history, he'll learn some experiences, he'll learn about people who lived in the past and are playing today. It'll enhance the depth of his reading. But the second reason I want kids to read today is that we are living in a world of fake news and misinformation and disinformation more and more. And it becomes all the more essential that people should have the capacity to have read widely enough that they can read with discernment. That when somebody tries to give them fake news, they can immediately understand that there's something here that doesn't gel with what I've read. I need to check this, I need to verify this, I need to look it up. And they should know how to look things up also. So reading is important, and reading with depth and complexity. Sometimes people give me a very defensive answer. Oh, my son reads as much as you used to do, but you read books and they're reading on a screen. But what are they reading on the screen? If they're reading books on a Kindle, is one matter. But if they're reading, messages forwarded on WhatsApp, that is not complex reading. That is not reading in depth. You need to be able to read lengthy texts, to be able to engage with complex arguments, with detailed reasoning, with the whole narrative. Whether you're reading fiction, whether you're reading a travelogue, whether you're reading a biography, whether you're reading a history, whether you're reading an argumentative book or a non-fiction work that just talks about the world today, whatever you want to read, that complex reading cannot be distilled into a short WhatsApp message. So disabuse your kids of the idea that getting on Quora or getting on Insta or getting on WhatsApp and reading all day on a screen somehow makes them some sort of educated person. It doesn't. It might actually. In fact, there's the real concern that, those of us who read newspapers used to think we were informed. Now you read your screen on a mobile phone, you're misinformed. So it's almost better not to have to go through that experience.
So do you still recommend reading physical copies of books and newspapers?
That's a personal bias, and maybe it's an old-fashioned bias. Yeah, I've never really related. I never owned a Kindle. I did own a Kindle once. I gave it away to my son or daughter-in-law or somebody. I can't remember, but I gave it away, and I've never bought another one since. Largely because I like the feel of a book. I like the way it looks. I like the cover. I'm very proud that my publishers attach a lot of importance to the covers of their books, because they feel that somebody should be attracted by the cover to see what's inside. I definitely find it attractive to hold a book, to turn the pages. I have a kind of visual memory. If I suddenly want to look up something I've read earlier, I will have a rough sense of the right-hand side page, left-hand side page, how many pages, and I can flip through the book and find it. All of these experiences are not so available on a screen. So that's a personal bias, but I want to stress that that's not to say don't read. If you really prefer reading on a Kindle or a big screen or an iPad, whatever, do that. I mean, that's your thing. But read lengthy text, complex text, demanding text that will challenge you, that will help you expand your vocabulary, your mind, your experience, your knowledge. Don't just read these short things. That's my only appeal. But the form you read is up to you. One good advantage of books: don't need batteries. So if your battery runs out, you can still turn the page. Sunlight will do.
So read, but don't read with an objective or a target in mind.
With a numerical target, no.
Yeah.
If you're reading, saying that I've got to finish a book, half the pleasure of reading, of savoring the words, the language, the situation, sometimes going back and rereading. Sometimes you find the author has made a mistake and the editors haven't caught it. They've named some particular character one thing on page 20 and something on page 34. Something else on page 340 maybe. Remembering that and going back to read it is also part of the joy of reading. You're reading to a target, you've no time for all that. It doesn't get from beginning to end, finish it off. And sometimes, when you have a target, and I did finish by Christmas that year, I made my 365. But the day I finished, I said, I'll never do this again, because half the fun was gone.
Then it became like a task.
It became a task, it became a target. I was often staying up late at night just to finish a book in order to notch one more notch on the tree kind of thing. So no, I would not recommend it.
So your surname has also sort of become like an adjective. I think many of our friends used to say that in school, that if we use some fancy words, my friends would say, oh, don't act like you're Tharoor. So it's been used like an adjective as well. So we should not read with the objective of becoming a Tharoor, putting it as an adjective, but we must read.
I'm not going to go around telling you not to be a Tharoor. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. I take your point. No, I think they should read for the joy of reading, for what the reading gives them, for what it teaches them, for what they learn from it.
That's how it naturally came to you.
Yeah.
So I want to come to your book now. And you've spoken about the origins of the English language. It's fascinating how so many of the words, so many of the ideas in the English language have been adopted from languages such as German, Japanese, also from Hindi.
Also, even from India.
Yeah.
As I pointed out in my book on British colonialism, the British came here and they took the word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. So, I mean, the British borrowed words from everywhere. And they really, I must say, as a result, have become the world's the closest thing to a universal language. It's the second language for people all over the world. And it's also the second language for many of us in India, first language for some of us. And at the same time, it's a language which has been enriched by infusions from various sources. Originally ancient Latin and Greek, thereafter various other languages. The French wrote a lot in. It's striking, for example, that pretty much anything to do with art and architecture in English is derived from French words. There are very many expressions that come from different languages, which, if they're newly taken into English from another language, you find them in italics in a text. But if they're actually language, if they're words that have existed, that have been used in English for quite some time, they just slip into the language without people being conscious anymore that they originated in another language. And of course, that includes many Indian words. I don't know how many of you realize that shampoo, the British word, the English word, comes from shampoo, which is what the English would order their Indian servants to do to wash their hair with soap. Shampoo, you know, so come and do a shampoo, and that became shampoo. That's how the word shampoo came into being. And words like bungalow and jungle and so on, you can see obviously came straight from English, but there are many other words. And loot is one that many people don't realize came from us. But the British cheerfully borrow these things. There's a soup which they call mulligatawny soup, and it sounds almost Irish, because mulligan and tawny are both Irish names, so mulligatawny soup. It's actually from Tamil. It's mulligatawny, which means chili, spicy water. It's a rasam. It was mulligatawny, and that became mulligatawny soup for the British to have a spicy Indian soup. So all of these things, the language is borrowed shamelessly, and I think it's great. That's the strength of a language. I'm much more in favor of a language being willing to absorb from other languages than a language which tends to police itself and say, no, this is not good in Hindi or this is not good French. I think that is somehow much more self-limiting. I mean, the French have even got an academy, the Académie Française, which actually sort of sits like guardians or policemen of the French language. That they actually will outlaw certain words if they find French people using words they don't approve of. And they would, so when the French started saying the weekend, in the English word weekend is le weekend, they would tell, no, you can't do that, it's la fin de semaine. Still, most French people in casual conversation will still say le weekend, bon weekend, have a good weekend, that kind of thing. So the point is that you can't really police. In English, when you have people speaking Hindi in India, very often, even people whose Hindi is very much better than their English, will allow English words to slip into their Hindi. What's wrong with that? It's fine.
And I think that's the beauty of any language, that it should not be limited by any physical borders or geographical borders. It should be able to travel those. And that brings me to my next question, that while in India particularly, I mean, ever since our childhood, we're told that you need to be a good English speaker. You need to be, right from kindergarten you're taught that. And these days I'm seeing that a lot of youngsters do not even know their mother tongue, and they know English before. They want to converse in English before that. So what do you have to say about, you've also spoken about how there's a sense of pride attached to any language, maybe for the English language. So there should be a sense of pride attached to our mother tongue as well.
There must be, absolutely. And I think it will be a great pity if people, in their desire to acquire English, lose the language that is most naturally available to them. As I said, the circumstances of my life were unusual, and that's what led me to become principally in English. Imagine if I had been born in a Kerala village and grown up in Kerala, I might have been, I hope, just as sort of proud and fluent and extensive vocabulary kind of person in Malayalam as I am seen as being today in English. And the truth is that it doesn't matter which language it is, it's yours, make it yours. And it so happens in my case it's English, but there are very many others who by artificially trying to learn a language that is not natural to them and which is not used in daily life. I was just reading the other day about somebody who said, I met a BA in English, and every time I asked him a question, he spoke to me in Hindi. And I said, what's the matter with you? You're a BA in English, I'm talking to you in English. And the guy said, sir, I learned my BA English in Hindi. Now, this is not sensible, right? And he may as well have done a good BA in Hindi literature. He might have been so much more confident and fluent in what he knew about his own language and traditions. And as far as kids are concerned, it's by and large established in all pedagogical studies that children learn best in their first language, which is usually their mother tongue. The language their mother has been talking to them in her lap, and the language they're hearing around them at home and with their little playmates when they're 2-3 years old, that's a language you should teach them. A second language can always follow. Many European countries will teach you English as a second, when you go to Germany or you go to Denmark or whatever, they'll teach you English as a second language. In some countries from the first grade, some countries from the third grade. But in the earlier stages, the first 4, 5, 6 years of learning, it's always in your mother tongue, so that you have that instinct established then.
Right. And from that, I want to come to the whole idea of communication. While we have spoken about how it makes you look fancy if you use these big words and these fancy words, it makes you look like you're more learned than a person who might be using simple English. But the point of communication is to be understood. So how do you strike that balance to be able to use these words and sound smart and tharoorish, if I may put it that way, but at the same time put your point across?
Well, let me ask you, have I used too many words that you didn't understand today? No?
Not
so that's the point. I know enough words to be able to choose what I hope is the appropriate word to express my thought in a way that reaches a larger audience. I'm not sitting here talking to a professor of English, I'm talking here to my fellow Indians of Delhi. And I'm talking to you in that way. And remember that that's something which can come instinctively to all of us. We don't have to make much of an effort. The problem with those who self-consciously use words in order to impress is they might impress, but they don't get their thought across. And that's much worse. It's far more important, as you rightly said, Priyanshu, to use language to communicate, not to use language to impress. Impress in other ways. Lift weights,
Play the guitar.
Play the guitar, yeah. Singing is great to impress. But I think with words, communicate.
Right, and that's where...
And with the right vocabulary and to have the right effect. He also wrote very comic novels full of zany plots, convoluted situations, and lots of funny things, but there's always a happy ending. So for a young person like me, it was a great way to both have a lot of fun and at the same time learn to enjoy and savor the joys of the English language in the hands of a master. And that's why unfortunately for me, I read every single Buddha's book before I was 19. He had written 95, I think. He died at the age of 90, when did he die? About 96, thereabout, 93, 94, he lived. He wrote 95 books, I read them all. And thereafter, because I rarely had time to reread, I would very occasionally, so every few years, reread one Buddha's just to give myself that treat of remembering why he had given me so much pleasure. And I think that's something I wish that more and more people had. I couldn't sadly infect my own children with this because each generation has its own tastes, I guess. And they read extensively, thank God, but they read other things. And they read genres that I never read. I never read fantasy fiction. I never read Tolkien and books about dragons and imaginary kingdoms. But they did, and if they wanted to, that's fine. I never told them what to read, what not to read. So I encouraged them to enjoy what I was enjoying. They would see me reading, but they went into their own things that they enjoyed when they were kids.
There's also this one chapter in the book that I remember. It says